How can it be the word of God? And I'm like, bro, you try and get 60 people together and write a story over 6,000 years and have it make sense. It's a cat. Another year, another book video. Are you going to stay there the whole time? And now you're leaving. Hello and welcome to this, my third one of these videos where I talk about books, and that's about all we do. A couple of years ago, I made a video where I challenged myself to read a book every month because I wanted to read more, and books are great. A year after that, I made a video where I talked about all the books I read, and then I've done that every year since. So this is this one. And here are the books that I read. But first, search Dark Tides wherever you get your podcasts. There'll be a link in the description, and everywhere else. You got to go listen to that because we've been spending a lot of time making podcasts. There's lots of vlogs on this channel if you want to know more about the process of that and the shenanigans we've been getting up to. So go check that out. Listen to the podcast, and also twitch.tv/BJSquid. Okay. Twitch.tv/BJSquid. I've been live streaming over on Twitch, and it's been really fun. Try and stream like twice a week. Very nerdy, so come check it out. Also, look at the setup. It's actually done. I got a new PC. I got the computer whole set up.
Oh, heck yeah. Check out that sweet-ass editing setup, mate. Oh, it's pretty good, eh? PC that I built. 2 screens, webcam for streaming, microphone plugged into the mixer, keyboard, mouse, things, books, yep, chair.
We got door, we got chair, we've got foam, we've got Cowboy Bebop, more Cowboy Bebop. We've got a lot of Cowboy Bebop. We're here to talk about books, so let's do that. We're gonna start with this, which is not the first book I read. It's actually the last one I finished. This is A Year with C.S. Lewis, and it's one of those, you read a page every day. So I started it at the beginning of the year. I read a page every day, and so I finished it last, even though it's really good. It's very, very theological. All right? Theology. Ever heard of it? Basically, it's a selection of excerpts from a bunch of his non-fiction theological books about God, and they've done a really good job, I think, of making a bunch of excerpts from like 6 different books all seem to like relate in a consistent way. One idea flows to the next idea and the next idea. It was really good. A lot of his ideas are very big concepts. So it was nice to just read one little idea at a time, and you kind of read it, and then you digest that and think about it, and you come back to it the next day. I definitely want to go through and read all of the books that were referenced here, because I think a lot of them will make a bit more sense when I've read the whole book. I've added little tags. I've folded over like half the pages of stuff I want to come back from. It was good. It was a nice way to just reconnect with Lewis and his ideas and his descriptions of things and his way of looking at the world and his way of looking at Christianity and just do that in a little slice every day. Highly recommend. So now we get into the actual books that I read, because this one kind of just happened over the year. And so now we'll get into the ones I actually read. So the first one was this one, Legacy of War by Wilbur Smith. It's massive, big on the cover. So this one is, I think, part 2 in a series, actually. This is the only one I've read. It's post-World War II. It's not really spy espionage. It's basically just action. It's like an action thriller. I really liked it. I thought the story was great. It's very, very intense in a lot of ways. So if you're interested in reading it, just it's very MA, and it's a big boy book. It's very violent. It's very, yes, a lot of stuff. That was a lot. There was a couple of scenes in there. There's one scene particularly where I was like, I know you're supposed to make the bad guy seem like a bad guy, but you didn't have to go to that much detail. Maybe just like skip a couple chapters, or maybe just don't read this one. I just think there was a lot of stuff that was a bit more intense than it needed to be, you know? Like, you could have told the story without that, and I think it would have been just as good. There's also a couple of scenes where people get killed in very haunting, memorable ways. So I don't know, it's pretty good. Just tread carefully. After that, I read The Baron and the Unfinished Portrait, which is another one of John Creasy's The Baron series of mystery, crime, paperbacks from the early 50s. It's another Baron book. I've talked about these in every video I've done. I love them. They're all great. It was just as good as any other one. Next we have The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. So, this, I walked into a bookshop with some friends and I saw the title and was like, I like crime, I like space, that's interesting. And then I looked down and saw the name. Chris Hadfield is a fairly famous astronaut, so I was like, ooh, fiction book written by an astronaut. That's pretty cool. Just bought it straight away. My slight concern was that the marketing on the back of the book is all kind of playing up the fact that he's an astronaut and like he can write space really well because he's been to space. Yeah, I know, but that doesn't make him a good author. And then I read it. He's a damn good author. I think this is probably my favorite book I read this year. It was incredible. I loved it. It's also pretty intense. It's a little bit graphic at times, but it's just so good. The story is good. The characters are good. He managed to like weave so many different plots and ideas, and there's like a romance plot in there. It's just amazing. So, very briefly, not to spoil much, I think it's Apollo 19 or 18 or something, or like whatever the last Apollo mission was in real life. This book is the story of like a fictional one more after that. It's very Cold War thriller, Americans having secrets, Russians having secrets, space race type, just fantastic. It's so good. It's so good. It might be just the fact that I'm a massive space nerd and anything space makes me happy, but like it's actually just such a great mystery story on its own. And you couple that with the fact that it's sci-fi and it's in space and it's written by somebody who has first-hand experience of what it's like to be in a spaceship in space. If you don't read any other book that I read this year, please read this one. It's amazing. It is kind of long, but it kept me engaged the whole way through. Just loved it. Next up, I read a Dorothy Sayers. This one is The Unpleasantness at the Bologna Club. This is the first one of her books I've read and the only one I've read so far. This was written in 1928. That kind of period of writing from the late 1920s up to the 1950s is probably my favorite period of writing. I love those crime, murder, mystery books from that era so much. And this was another one. It was really great. John Creasy's Baron books are a bit more, I don't know if action-packed is the right word. Probably that's the right word. They're a little bit more action-based. This was a lot more, a bit more like an Agatha Christie. It's not like breaking into houses and doing like sneaking around at night, which is what the Baron books are all about. This was a lot more like just conversations, and it's just a classic 1930s whodunit. It's great. I wouldn't say this is my favorite murder mystery I've read, but it was really good. And the thing that was fascinating about it is how she uses dialogue to describe things in scenes. So, for example, two characters are having a chat and she wants to describe that somebody stands up and like walks over to make coffee or tea or something during the scene. Instead of having a break from the dialogue and saying, this character such and such walked over to the kitchen and picked up the teapot, she just has them in a very realistic and lifelike way, halfway through their sentence, just cut it off and go, by the way, do you take sugar with your tea? It's really clever. So the dialogue, as you're reading along, you get an idea of like, oh, this person's just come through the door, or this person's just taken their coat off because the other character said, can I take your coat? Things like that. Doubly interesting given that I am on a podcast and we're looking into writing some audio drama type stuff and getting into the more scripted stuff. And it's really difficult to do that in audio because in a book, you can just cut away to explanations of what's happening. In a movie, you just see what's happening. But in an audio drama, it's a bit hard. If you're having a dialogue situation, you can't really then have a narrator cut halfway through for half a sentence to say, they walk over and pick up the coffee. It was a nice chill read. Didn't absolutely grab me, but it was a good mystery, and the dialogue was interesting from a writing perspective. Next, I read the last two books in the Chronicles of Narnia, because when I was young, The first Narnia book, The Magician's Nephew, was the first proper big book that I read. Was Narnia, and I continued to read the series, and I got all the way to about halfway through the Silver Chair, and got bored and gave up. If you've ever read it, I got to the point where they start going into the north, just when they start to see the first giants. I don't know, something to me about giants, I just don't like giants. I don't know why in stories. I'm not a fan of giants. So I think when they got to the giants bit, I was like, and I never finished Narnia for that reason. Okay. Which meant that I never went on and read The Last Battle. So I never knew how the Narnia story ended. And it stayed that way for like 10 years. When I finished this one, I was like, I think it's bloody well time that I finished Narnia. So I read this in a day, not even, I read this in an afternoon. Very different to all the other Narnia books. It's a lot darker and a lot more depressing than a lot of the other books, and adds a whole other level of world building to Narnia that really isn't there in the other books. The start as well, but also the ending. It really expands Narnia, and it really prepares for the final book. So I read that in a day, and then over the next week or so, I read this one, which is The Last Battle, which is the end of Narnia. I won't spoil it if you've never read it. Also very disturbing. It's disturbing in a child-friendly way, in the sense that it's not super creepy or really, really violent or something that would make it an adult book. But the story elements that he uses and the way he presents the new threat to Narnia in the final book is very conniving and very different to what it's kind of been in the previous books. This reminded me a lot of Paralandra as well. By the way, there's Narnia, written by Lewis. Same guy who wrote this, same guy who wrote the sci-fi trilogy. Anyway, it's very good. It's way more small scale than you think it is. Because I was like, oh, it's the last battle. And you read Prince Caspian, it's this huge, armies fighting each other and political power and all this stuff. The final battle, the last battle of Narnia, is really small scale. I'm not going to say much more than that because it'll spoil it. I loved it. It was disturbing, but in a really wonderful way. It's disturbing in Lewis's very wonderful. He's a Christian, so he writes Christian fiction. So it's disturbing, but it's disturbing in light of a world that is presided over by a greater good. And all of his writing is like that. It was good. It was satisfying. Unexpected, but satisfying. After that, I read a book that Aubrey recommended. Aubrey is one of the people on the podcast. He actually writes the podcast. Anyway, he recommended a book called Van Gogh, which I don't have because he lent it to me and I gave it back. So I'll just put a picture of the cover right here so that you know what it looks like. Again, modern book set in the late 1930s, just before the outbreak of World War II, and it follows this boy called Van Gogh who, kind of hard to describe him because the plot of the book is very much, it's one of those mystery books, except the mystery is Van Gogh trying to discover who he is and where he came from and why these people are trying to kill him. I think it made it a bit more difficult for me to be engaged with the story. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I loved it. It's everything that I love in books. It's 1930s, mystery, action, all the good stuff. But it was slightly less engaging as I was expecting. There is a sequel, picks up the story where it leaves off, and it does kind of leave on a bit of a cliffhanger. So I'd be interested to read the sequel. I'll probably do that this year. Lots of interesting characters coming out of nowhere, and you got to figure out what's their relevance, and then unexpected links to oh, that's who that guy is, and that's what that person is. There's also a really good romance plot that's weaved through it that I always enjoy when a romance plot is done well, in the sense of you're interested and engaged with it, but it doesn't take over the story. Van Gogh, pretty good. By the way, if you haven't seen my other book videos, I don't rate them. This one's a 47 out of 10, and this one's a 0 out of 9. I just kind of tell you what my experience was and roughly what the book's about, and then I figure you can make your own mind up whether you think that's going to be something that you'd like or not. All right, we got a couple more. This is The Thick Boy, third and final installment of the Thrawn Ascendancy prequel series. The other two books are sitting over there. These three books have the best covers of anything I've ever read. This damn book took me so long to finish. It took me 3 months, and it got to the point where it was a running joke with the people that I worked with, because I would take it to my dance gigs and it would be in my bag. And so every gig I would pull it out of my bag and it would be this big thick book and I'd be like a little bit further through it. And it got to the point where like I'd get there and one of my friends was like, "Did you bring the thesaurus this week?" I was like, "Yes, I brought the thesaurus," pull it out. That definitely took a lot longer because a lot of the reading that I did of this was at rehearsals and jobs. It was really good. It was a satisfying ending to the story. But my one criticism about these bad boys, and this is a criticism coming from somebody who has never written a book and doesn't know much about writing, there's a lot of plot points and a lot of characters and a lot of stuff, and keeping it all in your head, especially for this last one because it's so long, there's like 50 characters and they all have very complicated alien names, and I didn't really remember where they all come from and who they were and what relevance they had to what part of the story. I spent more time trying to remember what all of this has to do with the story than I did sitting back and being really engaged in the story itself. So it just pulled me out of it a little bit, and I think that problem gets worse because each book is longer than the last and each one has more characters and more plot points as it goes along. So like there are things that I just genuinely don't remember that were probably set up in this book and resolved in this book, but there were so many of those plot points that I don't remember how they all came together. So I don't know, they're good and it's fun because it's Star Wars, but it's outside the Star Wars universe, so it's basically just a whole new sci-fi with no rules connected to anything else, which is kind of fun. I think maybe he just got a little bit too carried away with all his ideas, which I sympathize with because I'm definitely that kind of person. But I did have a lot of fun reading it. I started reading it on the plane flying to Melbourne to do a job, and I finished reading it on a job as well. So that was cool. Oh. All right, we're nearly done. Last two, they're both by Earl Stanley Gardner. The first one I read was called The Case of the Half-Wakened Wife. The second one is The Case of the Lame Canary. I read this one because I just struggled through this and it was great, but I was like, man, I need to read a short book for the end of the year. So I read this one in like a week and really liked it. Discovered we had a second one, read that in like 4 days or something over Christmas, and they were so good. Again, very on brand for me. They're 1930s crime paperbacks, like real short, real just like engaging and super fast paced. But the main character is not a detective or an ex-cat burglar like in The Baron. In this book, the main character, Perry Mason, is a lawyer. So it's all about the law side of the cases. He takes on law cases for clients who seem to be in this hopeless situation. And of course, they're both murders. He's representing the obvious suspect in the murders in both books. And so the whole thing is, I believe they're innocent, and I'm fairly sure they're innocent, and there's no evidence. And so I've got to find the evidence before the trial so that I can prove that they're innocent. And it's really great. There's also this little romance plot between him and his secretary, like weaved through the two books. And they're both just such clever, witty characters. Probably if the books were longer, it might not work. He does a really good job of, the characters are probably too smart to be realistic, but because of the way the book works, you're rooting for them anyway, and you're like, I want him to like find that piece of evidence, and he's always skirting right up against the law to like, it's technically not legal for me to be here and get this evidence. The mysteries were really well written and really clever, and lots of twists and turns that you don't see coming. The writing is just fun, and that period of history, more so the atmosphere that gets created when you read stories that are written in that era or set in that era, just never fails to make me happy. I connect with it somehow, and I love that type of story. Earl Stanley Gardner's Perry Mason books, very good. I definitely want to try and buy some more and read some more because I'm invested now. They're really good. Well, there you go. That's all the books I read in 2022, not including these ones. I read these earlier. I just brought them out for comparison's sake. I had a great time. This year, in 2023, I've decided to change my approach to reading. Instead of trying to read a book every month, I'm doing my very best to try and read some amount of whatever book I'm reading every single day. I've done that fairly well so far in January. I've missed a few days, but generally I've been fairly consistent. Working my way through Stephen King's Fairy Tale at the moment. I'm nearly done. So I don't know, I'll see you in a year to let you know how that worked. I'm hoping that that will take a little bit of pressure off, like, I haven't finished that book yet this month, and hopefully being more consistent will mean that I will read more. That's the thought. Whether it will work or not, I don't know. But I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope maybe you've heard of a book here that you're interested in. Maybe it's helped you find a new book that you want to read. I would really recommend The Apollo Murders. I loved it. It was amazing. Especially if you're a massive space nerd like me. I hope you are more inspired to read maybe now. I don't really know why I make these videos. I just kind of do. They're fun and they keep me accountable and remind me that I have to keep reading books so I have books to talk about at the end of the year. I just like books, man. Don't forget to listen to the podcast and watch my live streams. Twitch.tv/BJSquid. That's what it's called. That's the one. Yeah. I'll see you on Twitch. Pretty fun. Sundays and Wednesdays. Anyway, bye.